If a person works on order, let's say a craftsman produces something on orders or under coercion, we may admire what he does, but we despise what he is because he's a machine, and we want people to be human. And you find exactly the same thing in Adam Smith, incidentally. One of the reasons Adam Smith was very critical of division of labor. I mean, he has an ode to division of labor at the beginning of Wealth of Nations, but if you go on, he criticizes it at the end. And he criticizes it because he says if we let division of labor continue, we will reduce people to creatures as stupid and as ignorant as it's possible for a creature to be, because they'll simply be carrying out mechanical operations under command in a very limited domain. And what you are, you know, your intelligence, your understanding, your human characteristics come from your capacity, from the options available to you to carry out independent, productive, creative activities, work included, maybe in free association with others because we're social beings, but not under external coercion. And he said any civilized society is going to have to prevent this from happening. In the 18th century, in the Enlightenment and the period of early modern libertarian revolutions, people like, for example, Wilhelm von Humboldt and Rousseau thought about exactly these questions. They both understood in some sense. It was hard to formulate it clearly and coherently at the time, but they both grasped the idea that languages are basically infinite, that they're expressions of human creativity. In fact, that's a leading Cartesian idea, which came to them right through the rationalist and romantic traditions. And they were also both deeply interested in human liberation. And they did, in fact, try to connect these things pretty much in the way you suggest, by suggesting that at some core level, part of human nature is which is reflected on the cognitive side in things like language, is the capacity to produce and understand and articulate and express new thoughts without limit and without control. So the crucial fact about language use is that it's not determined by our situation. It's coming out of us as freely willed action in some sense, and continually novel and so on. And to express thoughts and ideas that are new to oneself and to other people, but that are intelligible and appropriate and so on. This is a core aspect of human nature. In fact, for the Cartesians, it was the mark of mind. It was the point at which, the specific point at which minds differentiated from machines in their framework. At the core of human nature, again, is a kind of what was later called by Bakunin an instinct for freedom. That is a need to become involved in free creative activity, free creative work. So for, say, Humboldt, one's work is sort of the core of one's existence. You want to be involved in creative, honest work in association with others, but voluntary association and not under external control. These things have mostly been forgotten. As the market systems of the 19th century developed, they eliminated all of this. They would have appalled Adam Smith, no doubt, the market systems that developed, because when you get to people like, say, Malthus and Ricardo and so on, the conception of human beings as freely creative, active people with intrinsic rights due to their nature disappears. And people become nothing more, they have no values other than what they can sell on the market, their labor power. If you can't sell your labor power on the market, you have no right to live. That's the way it was discussed. Because there's nothing to a human being other than what can be attained by sale of labor power within a market system under what become basically totalitarian structures, corporate structures and so on. So the modern extensions of classical liberalism are very anti-libertarian. And the ideologies change, and the intellectuals change and so on. So this tradition has pretty much been, well, if not wiped out, at least marginalized. But it's there, and it certainly can be revived. It stayed alive, for example, in the anarchist tradition, and in parts of the libertarian left. In the United States, you find traces of it real traces, as late as people like John Dewey who probably didn't know any of these things, but just came out of it from another source and, you know, reached the same point in his conception of democracy as of value because it opens the opportunities for people to freely liberate themselves, as they must do. It's their sort of core in essence. In the contemporary world, you'd be hard put to find much discussion of this, unfortunately. But I think it should be revived. I think it's very significant. Marx himself was a complex figure. The early Marx, so you read the philosophical manuscripts and so on, this is coming straight out of the French and German Romanticism. So the kinds of ideas you find expressed in Humboldt and in the more libertarian side of Rousseau himself was very split. But if you take the libertarian-esque part of Rousseau, the Second Discourse on Inequality and Humboldt and so on, all of this that's the background in which Marx grew up. And if you read the philosophical and manuscripts of the early period, they're immersed in this. So his theory of alienation comes out of this. Coerced labor is alienating and counter to human nature precisely for these reasons, for the Humboldtian reasons. When you get to the later Marx, it's sort of like a scholarly debate about whether he changed his mind or just started talking about other things. But anyway, you don't find it any longer. And by that time, Marxism does become, exactly as you say, very detrimental to this. So you get this idea, which you do find in Marx, but he couldn't have believed it, that human nature is just a historical product. And people are just malleable. They're made what their culture turns them into. You get this even in people like Gramsci, who was one of the more libertarian Marxists. But this idea that humans are simply formed by the environment and they are nothing but clay, passive clay in the hands of their molders, that's an idea which is very attractive to radical intellectuals because they think they're going to be the molders, of course, and that leads right to the Leninist version of Marxism. And it does become a kind of orthodoxy. And the earlier views are either forgotten or marginalized, although they're certainly there in Marx, and they certainly are in the tradition that he came from. I think it's a tragedy and a catastrophe that the left has accepted the idea of humans as historical products, simply reflections of their environment. Because what follows from that, of course, is that there's no moral barrier to molding them any way you like. I mean, if humans have no inner nature, if they don't have an inner instinct for freedom, if it's not fundamental to their nature to have free, creative, productive work under their own control, if that's not part of their nature, then why, there's no moral reason for allowing them that space. You could just mold them into being what you think they ought to be. And you can be the central committee, or you can be the managers of the corporation, or the directors of a fascist state, or whatever.